Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Climate and Water Update webinar for Autumn 2020. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. And for anyone who's joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Today we'll be discussing recent climate conditions over summer and also the autumn outlooks for temperature, rainflow and stream flow. My name is Jordan and I will be your moderator today. I'm joined by Claire, whose voice you just heard before. She will be producing today's webinar. Together we will make the webinar as interactive as possible. But before we start, can we ask for your attention as we cover off some housekeeping items. Our broadcast today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. This webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some useful tips on your screen. Most importantly, note the chat box where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters. Please use this and not the Q&A box to send your questions to us during the session, and we will answer as many as possible during the allocated breaks. And there are plenty of breaks, so please send them through now. If you want to test out the chat box now, feel free to send us your name, tell us your name and where you're dialing in from. So in response to feedback received from previous webinars, here's some information on how to participate in polls. When a poll is in motion, attendees will see a set of questions to the right of their webinar screens. Please select your answer choice followed by the submit button below them. I will also take this moment to thank those of you who sent in questions during the registration process. We have developed the content of this session in accordance with the common themes of those questions, so thank you for engaging with us. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce our presenters to you, Catherine Ganter and Jonathan Pollock. Hi, guys.
Hi, Jordan.
G'day, Jordan.
Welcome today. I know we're really excited. We've all been talking weather this morning, and there's plenty to talk about. Catherine and Jonathan both work in the climate prediction team at the Bureau. Their experience lies particularly in seasonal outlook and climate. Catherine's main focus is reporting on and communicating the current state of the main climate drivers for Australia, as well as the monthly and seasonal rainflow and temperature outlooks. Jonathan joined the Bureau as a weather observer, collecting and recording meteorological data for climate, forecasting and aviation purposes. Later, he moved into climate information services, turning data into useful information for agricultural, emergency services and general public users. Hi, guys. Catherine, would you like to tell us what we're going to be hearing about today?
Sure thing, Jordan. So today we'll start with a summer 2019-20 wrap-up, and then we'll move on to the autumn 2020 outlook and what's behind these outlooks.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine. So before we get stuck into the talk, let's hear from our audience about what your business is most interested in. We've got a quick poll for you. The question is, what scale of forecast information is most useful for your business? Is it town or city? That's A. B, state or territory. C, national. D, international. Or E, other. And you can tell us that by typing into the chat. While those come about, we do have a bunch of questions that we wanted to get to. We're going to start with Dean. A lot of questions about this at the moment. Have we seen the end of the fire season in Victoria? Obviously really important for a lot of people.
It's a great question. So the fire season normally, it depends on where you are, and for the southern parts of the country, we still get potential fire activity during autumn. So I guess it'll depend on how much rainfall you've had as well, if we've seen enough to kill the conditions.
Okay. A lot of people hoping for that. Andrina, I hope I've said that name correctly, has said, were there any particularly unusual weather patterns experienced over summer and the impact leading into the autumn and winter weather patterns?
That's a great question too. So in the start of summer, we had two very dry climate drivers in place. Many of you will have heard about the positive Indian Ocean dipole and the dry conditions it brought for the second half of the year. And we also had a negative SAM, which also amplified that dryness across much of the east coast. And they both headed out at the start of 2020, so hopefully you'll see a bit about that in the recent conditions.
Okay, I'm really looking forward to some of that, what we've been talking about with those conditions really fascinating for me. Jane has asked, what is the likelihood of follow-up rains recharging the Darling River and the Menindee Lakes?
That's a great question. Do you want to take that one, Jonathan?
Yeah, certainly. We're certainly there's some rainfall expected, but what it does in terms of storage is something that we can answer on our website. We have a lot of information there about storage levels and stream flows as well.
Okay, great. So head to the website if you want to know more about that. And you can also look up your individual area as well. So a couple last seconds to get your answers in for that poll before we move on. This one I'm hoping we can answer kind of quickly. Michael has asked, he's interested in rainfall outlook for the mid-north coast of New South Wales for the next 12 months, including global weather influences and the likelihood of an El Nino in summer 2021. It's hard to say a outlook for one place for that long, but what about the likelihood of an El Nino in summer 2021?
Yeah, you're right, Jordan. That's probably a bit further ahead than we normally look. Normally we're looking to the season ahead. And what we're going to discuss later on is that it looks like the Pacific will probably stay INSO neutral going into autumn.
Okay, really interesting. All right, so Catherine, you've got the results of our first poll.
Yes, I certainly do. And we can see that the most popular answer here is the state or territory level, with 64 out of almost 200 favouring that choice. And the next most popular one is town or city.
Okay, so people really concerned about their backyard at the moment, and we'll hopefully cover off everything that you need to know. Please keep your questions coming in. We've got a lot of time to answer questions, so we will try and get to all of them. So thank you for participating in the first poll. We're now going to continue with the presentation. Catherine, you're going to give us a wrap-up of what happened in summer now.
Yes, but not a song, I promise. So first up, let's start with the summer rain. And on the right here, we have our summer rainfall map, with the blue shading being wetter than average and the red shading being drier than average. And I don't normally mention this in our webinars, but that white is the middle 40% of records. And in fact, summer was close to average for Australia, at 8% below the long-term average. And there is some variation across the country, but no state or territory wound up in the bottom or top 20 this season. However, summer overall hides the story, and this is what we were mentioning about the dry climate drivers. We had a summer of two pretty different halves. In December, it was very dry, and it was the driest December in 120 years for Australia, and it finished off our driest year on record. And in early to mid-January, we saw a change. There were two cyclones across the country, Blake and Claudia, and they brought heavy rain to much of the top end of the Northern Territory and northern and central parts of WA, while the East Coast saw heavy falls in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland. And just to point out that dark blue spot, wettest on record in the WA interior, that was from the remnants of Tropical Cyclone Blake. And February brought more tropical moisture to the country and another two cyclones, Damien and Esther, and Esther's still been influencing us a little bit into March. A little bit. I mean much more than a little bit.
How long? I don't know if you can answer this. It's obviously different per tropical cyclone, but I remember hearing about Esther last week. How long do these things last for usually?
It's quite variable, Jordan. It really just depends on the track, the path that the cyclone follows, and how much time it sort of spends over land and how much time it spends in the above the water as well.
Okay.
And also, in addition to Damien and Esther, we saw a slow-moving low-pressure trough bring very heavy rain to the east coast. So you'll see that in February, that dark blue colour. And it brought Sydney a 4-day total of 391.6 millimetres. That's the highest 4-day rainfall total for any month since February 1990. So it was quite a decent fall. Okay, and let's have a look at maximum temperatures. On the right here, we have our summer maximum temperature map, with yellow shading being warmer than average and blue shading being cooler than average. But basically this season all we see is mostly yellow. It was Australia's second warmest summer on record, and we can see some of the northern areas coming in with their highest on record in 110 years with those dark orange colours. However, again, summer hides quite a bit of the variability we saw across the season. December, not only was it dry, it was very warm, and it was warmest on record for all states except Victoria and Tasmania, although Victoria came in second warmest. And I don't think I've seen a monthly map with quite that much dark orange highest on record colour. And part of this was the monthly value was an incredible 4.15 degrees above average, and it was head and shoulders above the previous December record of 2.41 degrees above average, and that was set last year in 2018. So we saw the heat persist in much of the north and east for the remainder of summer, but February in particular felt quite mild to some. In fact, for Victoria, this February was the coldest since 2011, and for New South Wales and South Australia, it was their coldest since 2012. And there's actually a really good statistic that illustrates this contrast for Melbourne. We had 3 days where we reached 40 degrees in December, and that was the most since December 1897. Whereas there were no days above 35 in February, and the last time that happened was 1994. So we can sort of see this contrast between the start and the end.
You've spoken about heat there. Is there any noticeable difference in humidity? Susan has asked, is there any bigger heat going up and down? Sorry, we know the heat's gone up and down, but what about the humidity? Have we seen any rises in that?
I must admit I haven't looked at humidity specifically, but partly the trouble is finding good quality observations for humidity over a long period of time is quite tricky.
Okay.
So unfortunately I don't have anything that we can say at this point.
Yeah, if it feels humid, it is humid. That's the only way we can put it.
Coming from the tropics.
Yes.
So before we move on, I just wanted to focus a little more on the December extreme heat, and there were a vast number of records broken. This map here shows the hottest temperature recorded at locations during December. So for instance, I wanted to focus in on the Nullarbor station in southern South Australia. So it's in the darkest brown colour there. And it recorded 49.9 on the 19th of December. And that's the hottest December temperature recorded in Australia, and also the highest temperature recorded for any month since February 1998. There was also widespread, almost national level heat on many days, with the record set for the highest temperature averaged across Australia. So the 18th of December saw a national average temperature of 41.88 degrees. So that's just the temperature averaged across the country. Now, the previous record of 40.30 was beaten 6 times during December. So it's really some widespread heat that we saw during the month. So if we did talk a lot about maximum temperatures, so just a quick look at minimum temperatures today, and they were also very warm, coming in at second warmest summer nights on record, and Western Australia had its warmest nights on record, with the Northern Territory and Queensland coming in second. So likewise, the nights were also rather warm. So let's have a look now at root zone soil moisture. So the top 1 metre of the soil profile. And we can see at the end of summer, February now has some above average soil moisture across the country. However, we can see in Western New South Wales and Southwest Queensland, they still have a below average soil moisture profile. I also just wanted to show how December looked. So that's there in the bottom left corner. So we can see quite a dramatic change over summer.
So we're getting a lot of questions in regards to soil moisture. Claudia, Adam, we've also had Crawford message us and say, how can we find out more about like deep soil moisture profiles? You've mentioned a little bit there, but is there somewhere else that people can go to find out more?
Yeah, actually, the link at the bottom there, the Australian Landscape Water Balance, or rather the soil moisture, if you go to that website there, there's a few different levels that you can choose to look at. I tend to show the top 1 metre of the soil profile, mainly because that's where the majority of the roots grow. So it's generally the area of biggest interest.
Fair enough.
So let's look at rainfall deficiencies. If we take a look at the past 23 months, so almost 2 years, we can see the bottom 10% of rainfall totals coloured in red. The middle red colour is the bottom 5%, and the deepest red colour is lowest on record. So I want to highlight an area for you. And for this region, while there's still rainfall deficiencies in the current map, what we can see is the colour intensity has decreased. So we've seen an improvement in the situation across the region. However, there is still a way to go. So for Western New South Wales, who has very much missed out, it looks like there should be some rainfall headed their way from the remnants of ex-tropical cyclone Esther. So this map that I've just clicked on is the rainfall forecast starting yesterday. Unfortunately, the timing of our webinar today has meant I couldn't show the rainfall totals from the 4th, but the forecast map gives you an idea of where rainfall will have fallen. And Saragominda in southwest Queensland has had a 70 millimetre and 128 millimetre of rain over 2 days. And Western New South Wales has had fairly large areas with 25 to 50 millimetres of rain, and a few isolated areas up to 100 millimetres. And I was just reminded before we started the webinar, Birdsville as well has had some pretty impressive totals. They've had a 67 and a 58 millimetre across 2 days, and that I'd just like to contrast with the 2019 total of 40.4 millimetres. So the 2 days have more than doubled the last year's totals. And I've just been shown a typo on my slide. Thank you. It is to January 2020 in the top right corner. Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah. Charlie, you win the award. You found the one mistake we purposely put in there. For anybody who has still got questions about the soil moisture, our super producer Claire has just thrown in the link to find out all the deep soil moisture profiles if you were interested in that. Sorry to interrupt.
Thanks, Jordan. So how are our water storages looking? Let's start with the Murray-Darling Basin, which has been a focus of recent months. And these plots here show 3 years of stream flow data, with the pink line showing this time last year. Unfortunately, well, I can't comment on what's happened yesterday, but much of the rain to date has either fallen to the east of the Divide or not near catchments in the Murray-Darling Basin. So this means storages so far have only had a relatively small rise in the Northern Basin from about 6% to 12.6%. So hopefully some of the rain from the remnants of Esther might help in increasing this. In the south, the storages are at 37%. So let's take a look at storages elsewhere, and I've highlighted 3. And these 3 have shown notable rises in their storages. I'm going to start with the Pilbara in the top left, and that's gained 2 years' worth of water from the recent tropical cyclone activity, lifting their storages to 76%. So it's fantastic news for them that they have their storages filled for the region there. And both the northeast coast and southeast coast have also seen notable rises from the heavy coastal rain. And just to focus quickly on the southeast coast, that includes Sydney, which saw the city's storages rise from about 42% to 81% after that 4-day heavy downpour that we were talking about. Further south, storages in Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia are similar to or slightly higher than this time last year, while the southwest, which is on the left there, is slightly lower than this time last year. But we must remember this isn't the filling season for the south, so it's not really much of a surprise to see the current trends at the moment.
If you want to look at those in more detail, Claire is putting another link into chat right now, and you can check out all the water storages, including the one in your area.
Thanks, Claire.
Catherine, I don't know if you know, somebody asked us about Lake Argyle. Tara asked if that Pilbara storage was related.
I don't think I have that at hand, unfortunately.
Maybe, Tara, you can have a look on the water storages website.
Yep, we've got that link in there for you, Tara. You can check it out now.
And we also can't touch on summer without mentioning the bushfires, which, as we know, last year started much earlier than normal. Unfortunately, we've seen 34 lives lost, along with 2,000 to 3,000 houses lost, and conservative estimates place wildlife loss at around 1 million animals. It's hard to explain the scale of this event, but it's touched many people. But now, almost all the fires that started this season have been contained.
Hooray.
Yeah.
Well done.
With New South Wales reaching this status on the 13th of February and Victoria last week. And on the 2nd of March, the New South Wales Rural Fire Service noted for the first time since early July 2019, there was currently no active bush or grass fires in New South Wales, marking the end of more than 240 days of fire activity for the state. And there is one aspect of the bushfire season that I wanted to touch on quickly, issues with smoke. And this affected many of the key population centres across the east, Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, even Hobart and Adelaide, in addition to the surrounding regions as well, of course. And the satellite picture here that I've pulled out from early January shows the smoke, which is that pale browny colour compared to the bright white of the cloud. And you can also see just in front of that white cloud on the left, the plume of smoke from Kangaroo Island. It's anticipated that there'll be an updated bushfire outlook sometime in early autumn, so not quite in time for this webinar, unfortunately, but keep an eye out on the Bushfire and National Hazards CRC website for it. So I didn't want to end on a fire note, so I've grabbed a few pictures to show what some of the summer rains have done. And I can't wait to see what the March rain pictures will look like. So those cows in the corner there are in Western New South Wales. The farmers in the top right there are jumping for joy at Meandarra rains in southern Queensland. And the flooding in the bottom corner there is near Mount Tamborine in southeast Queensland. So it's been really nice to sort of see bits of green and bits of water appearing across the country.
Excellent. Yeah, it has been fantastic, and like you said, I can't wait to see what happens with this latest batch. That we are just pouring over the numbers of the Bureau today. Everyone's buzzing around trying to find out how much rain fell last night. We've got our second poll for you to participate in now. You should see it on your right-hand side of the screen. We're going to be asking, what climate information do you need most for autumn? So is it rainfall? That's A. B, temperature. C, heat wave. D, water storage, or E, other. And you can put that in the chat. So while we get those answers in, we do have some more questions. Adam, who is one of our very early loggers on today, we saw you as soon as we started up the session. He said, using retrospective data, how well do models perform circumstances where they are close and circumstances where they're poor? That might be a question for you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Model performance is something we're very interested in at the Bureau, in how ours performs, but also how other international models perform as well. And something we notice across most models is that they tend to perform, they have times of the year when they are more skillful than other times of the year.
Can you explain what skillful means?
So this is when the model correctly predicts sort of the signal for wetter or drier or cooler or warmer than average. And typically, it's times of the year when we have our strongest sort of climate drivers, or when our climate drivers are likely to be in sort of strong phases. So it's normally a bit later in the year, and it's often seasons when we'll have either a strong Indian Ocean dipole or a strong ENSO event. We'll find that those models there's better predictability in the weather, and those models end up doing a better job.
Okay.
And in seasons when there aren't strong drivers, they tend to struggle a bit more.
Right. I always find that interesting because we do look at a whole bunch of different models here, so finding out how they work is always interesting to me. Keep the questions coming as we continue the poll. We'd like as many questions as we can, and we do have some more question and answer times coming up in a minute, but we do have a question from Michael. He has asked, are tropical cyclones tracking or impacting further south? Midwest WA has been very humid. Blake and Esther have been tracking down inland, but impacted all the way down to the eastern states. Are we seeing that more?
It's a great question.
Well, something that we've seen this season, but every season tends to be different, and the paths or tracks that the cyclones take are fairly unique.
Okay.
And to my knowledge, no one's looked at whether cyclones are tracking further south than normal at this point either.
So John, has asked, the turnaround in weather, so rainfall, he's put in brackets, in recent weeks has been phenomenal. Do you see this trend continuing over the coming weeks or months? And why has it been so many forecast models struggle to predict this change? And we spoke a little bit about how if there's no models, or if there's no climate drivers, the models struggle. But do you think we'll see more of this?
Well, I think it's a great question to segue into our next section, which is actually looking at the outlook. But John is right. We saw a bit of a turnaround in the outlooks as well. So we had some very dry outlooks in the latter half of last year. But the advice we were giving people towards the end of the year was that what we were seeing was that as the positive Indian Ocean dipole and the negative SAM event were likely to decline, the outlooks were likely to become more neutral or even wetter in parts.
Okay, so we're really trending a lot towards your specialised field here, Jonathan, which is climate outlooks. And we're going to continue that by jumping into the autumn outlook. Just wrapping up our poll, rainfall was the one that you all mentioned that you need most for autumn. But we did get an interesting one, another soil moisture was added. They said, can E be soil moisture next time? So plenty of people wanting to know all about where the rain's coming from and where it's going after it lands. All right, take it away for our autumn outlook now, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jordan. So on this slide, we have two maps showing the rainfall outlook for March on the left and the 3-month outlook for autumn on the right. Now, the yellow to brown shading corresponds to areas that are likely to be drier than average. The green to blue shading corresponds to areas that are likely to be wetter than average. And the white or off-white shading, those are areas that have roughly equal chances of being wetter or drier than average. Now, overall, the outlooks for March and autumn are mostly neutral, and they look pretty similar. But you can see that it's likely there's some parts of the north that will be drier than average, and there's parts of the south that are likely to be wetter than average. Now, as we just mentioned, we expected this autumn, the sort of the major drivers of our rainfall and temperature patterns are likely to remain neutral. So they're not giving us a really strong push towards wet or dry or hot or cool. And when that happens, we'll often see maps that have a lot of white on them, maps that will sort of be close to 50-50. Now, those patches of drier in the north and wetter in the south that we are seeing are likely due to some other factors, not our major climate drivers. We've got some warmer sea surface temperatures in the western tropical Pacific, and that's likely to be drawing moisture away from northern Australia. So that could be responsible for part of that dry pattern in the north. But at the same time, we've also got, and we expect it to continue to have, some warmer sea surface temperatures around northern Australia. And typically, warmer temperatures in that area would increase the chance of above average rainfall in the south. So now we've mentioned a little bit about the autumn break. So I thought we'd put a slide in. So alongside our 1 month and our 3 month outlook maps, we also have single week and fortnightly outlooks too. And these can be useful for predicting the timing of events like the autumn break. But I'll go back a step and first we'll talk about what is an autumn break. And normally it's the first good rainfall after summer at the beginning of the southern growing season. And that generally is going to mean a different amount of rainfall for different users, and even sort of a slightly different time of the year. Some people start to look for it from March, some people start to look for an autumn break from April. So one of the most common ones or common criteria that we talk about in Victoria or parts of Victoria is getting at least 25 millimetres or around an inch of rain over about 3 days from the 1st of March. And if that's the criteria that you sort of use, or roughly the ones that you've used, then you've probably already satisfied that criteria just in the last 24 hours with the amount of rainfall we've seen come through over eastern Victoria and most of New South Wales. Those parts would already have their 25 millimetres. So yeah, so it's great news. If that's sort of the criteria that you use for the autumn break and you live in those areas, it's probably already occurred. But if you are looking ahead, if you don't live in those parts and you're interested in the timing for South Australia, Western Victoria, or even Southwest WA, what I'm showing you on this slide is it can be useful. So if you go to the Climate Outlook's webpage and you have a look at rainfall, I've got a screenshot on the left-hand side there showing you that there's a menu underneath rainfall where you can select a chance of at least product. And under the chance of at least, there's a threshold of different amounts of rainfall you can check for. So if we were looking at our autumn break example, we might pick 25 millimetres. And then we can have a look at our weekly and our fortnightly maps and see which parts of the country, which parts of the south have a higher chance of receiving or getting at least that 25 millimetres. Now, the maps are updated twice a week, and so there'll be some fresh ones out there this afternoon. It's important to note, if we're looking at the week ahead, then the weather forecast is the place to go for information. But if you want to know what's likely to happen after those 7 days, come to the Climate Outlook's webpage and have a look at the weekly or the fortnightly outlooks as well. Okay. So now moving on to temperatures. On this slide, there are 2 temperature outlook maps for autumn. The map on the left shows that much of the country is likely to have warmer than average days, except parts of the south where there's no strong push either way. And on the right, that map showing us that minimum temperatures, most of the country has a very high chance, sort of greater than 80% chance, of warmer than average nights this autumn. On this slide, we have the stream flow outlook for February to April. And it's mostly low stream flows that are likely for the period. And we had low flows at most locations across Australia in January, although there were some near median flows in the north and parts of the east. It looks it's an improved outlook compared to last month, where we saw a lot more areas with low flow. And the next outlook, the one for autumn, March to May, is out next week. And so the outlooks for rainfall and temperature shift the odds of the chances of certain significant weather occurring. And so what we can see, we've still got an outlook for warmer maximum temperatures for the north and parts of the east as well. So that means there's an increased chance of late season heat waves in parts. As Catherine mentioned before, the bushfire season is still ongoing. We still can have bushfires during autumn. But the fairly neutral outlook means that there's a decreased chance of widespread flooding. Now, notwithstanding, we've seen some great falls in the last 24 hours and probably some localised or flash flooding in parts. I know I got my feet wet on the way into work. But what we're talking about really here is broad scale, is widespread flooding, the kind of flooding we might see in a La Nina.
Actually, my train line was flooded this morning.
Great, thank you for all that information. I mean, it really does give us a good idea of what's going to be happening. We do have a ton of questions that have come through, so if you have some, this is the time to do it. This is our session 1, where we love to press these guys and give them as many questions as possible, see how many they can answer. So Jim is up. How do we get much wetter than average rather than just the probability of above or below average?
That's a great question. So in the past, the maps that we used to provide were those classic chances above median maps. But with some recent upgrades, or some upgrades over the last few years, we've been able to introduce a range of new products. We have something called Outlook Scenarios, which tells you sort of the more likely or less likely amount of rainfall that you can get. But we also have those chance of at least products that I just mentioned before, where you can actually select a threshold and see what your chances are of getting at least that amount. Now, for the shorter, the rainfall anomalies, do we do this for 1 and 2?
We don't. We put out chance of exceeding values rather than anomalies for the time period.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are a couple of other types of information that people can get besides just the chance of above median.
How is, on a different note, you just said that we've seen a lot of changes that have made these new forecasts possible. How much has the technology advanced in the last couple of years?
Well, we've seen big changes in the technology. We've seen a change in model. We've seen a change in the computing power that model runs on as well.
And that model was 250 kilometres down to 60 k's, so it's quite a...
Yeah, so what Catherine's talking about there is the resolution of the model. So the old model used to be much coarser. The information you get out of it, it wasn't as local as the information that we get now. But we've also spent a lot of time and effort improving the front end of our product so that it's more usable. We spend a lot more time doing webinars and videos now and talking to people as well, not just sort of putting maps out and hoping that people can interpret them.
Excellent. So we've also got a question from Adam. Is it easy to quantify the impact of sudden stratospheric warning event as a climate driver for the past summer?
So that's a great question, because a lot of people don't realise that the result of the sudden stratospheric warming was actually the negative southern annular mode. So what happens is over the Antarctica, we get a sudden warming in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and that brings on a negative SAM. Okay. And so the negative SAM would have amplified the effect of the positive IOD across much of the east. So it's not that much of a surprise that October to December was rather dry as a result, because we had 2 dry climate drivers going on.
Okay, excellent. And it looks like Claire's busily trying to find an article related to that, and that's going into your chat right now. So if you'd like to see a little bit more about it, you can check that link. Now, got to excuse me, it did say stratospheric warning, and that's why I said that. It is warming, it's sudden stratospheric warming, so excuse me for that. We have Charlie, who has said, last year we saw the positive IOD and negative SAM negatively impacting rainfall activity for much of the continent. How are these shaping up for 2020, and what will be the likely drivers for autumn and winter?
Excellent. The timing is perfect again, Jordan. That's just what we're about to talk about. Maybe I'll dive straight into the slide.
I think that sounds good.
Show people. Thanks, everybody, for your questions. So as we touched on, our major drivers, or two of our major drivers, the El Nino Southern Oscillation and the Indian Ocean Dipole, are neutral at the moment, and they're likely to remain neutral through to at least the middle of the year. And that's why we have a neutral rainfall outlook for large parts of the country. Now, you can see those on that diagram there. We've got the Indian Ocean Dipole in the top left corner out in the Indian Ocean, and the El Nino Southern Oscillation out in the Pacific. But there's a couple of other drivers, and they work on sort of shorter time scales, sort of days to weeks rather than months and seasons. And that's the Southern Annular Mode to the south in that picture, and the Madden-Julian Oscillation in the tropics. And we're not expecting either of those to have a strong influence over our weather in the coming weeks either. SAM typically doesn't have much of a rainfall impact during autumn, and the MJO is likely to remain weak or even indiscernible in the coming weeks. So on this slide are a couple of charts. And as I mentioned before, we're very interested in model performance, not just our own, but also what the other models from other international agencies are telling us. And so the chart on the left compares the different forecasts from different agencies for El Nino, and this is looking out to June. So you can see that all those little bars correspond to a forecast from each model, and they're all sort of nested within that middle third, that white shaded area, and that's kind of neutral sea surface temperatures. You can see that there's a blue shaded area on the left corresponding to La Nina, and over on the right where it's warmer, a pink shaded area corresponding to El Nino, and you can see that all of the models, even though there's a little bit of difference between them, they all expect sea surface temperatures to be close to sort of El Nino neutral or ENSO neutral, sorry. Now, on the right-hand side is a similar type of chart, but this time it's for the models, for their prediction of what the Indian Ocean Dipole is going to be doing at June. And once again, you can see that in the middle, there's a white shaded area corresponding to sort of neutral or near average Indian Ocean Dipole values. Then on the left-hand side, there's some blue territory where you're sort of in the negative IOD space. And on the right-hand side, some warmer pink shaded area, which corresponds to positive Indian Ocean Dipole territory. Now you can see that a couple of the models there, the ones labelled CANCIFS and ECMWF, are actually poking or sort of just pointing just across the threshold into the positive Indian Ocean Dipole area. But the majority of models aren't, and that the average of all the models, that's the bar at the very bottom, the one labelled mean, that's also neutral as well. So for both our big climate drivers, the El Nino Southern Oscillation and the Indian Ocean Dipole, most international models, ours included, are showing that it's likely they'll be in a neutral phase in the middle of the year. So I thought we might have a look, what's a typical autumn rainfall pattern look like if we've got sort of neutral drivers. And typically in March to May, the interior can have very low rainfall, less than 10 millimetres in places, and it generally increases outwards towards the coast. Eastern parts of Queensland and western parts of Tasmania generally record the highest rainfall, and typically more than 800 millimetres for the season. And along the east, you can see the Great Dividing Range marks a bit of a difference where you generally have a higher rainfall to the east of the divide than you do to the west. And it's also worth talking about the trend in autumn rainfall. So when we think about what normal rainfall is, we're generally these days we're talking about what the average patterns have been like in the last 30 years, not what the patterns have been like for the full rainfall record back to 1900. So on this slide, there's a map that shows you the rainfall deciles have been for autumn for rainfall from 1996 through 2019. Now, I picked 1996 because it was around the mid-90s when we started to notice a bit of a shift in autumn rainfall patterns over southeastern Australia. And so what this map is illustrating is that the most recent 23 years worth of autumn rainfalls have been the driest on record for parts of southwest WA, but for a lot of eastern Australia as well, they've been sort of very much below average. So the autumns that you and I might recall, the ones that have happened in the last 23 years, they're actually drier than the average for all the autumns that we've observed since 1900.
Wow. Excellent. Well, and thank you for that information. Super interesting. Tons to digest there, and we hope that gives you and your business a lot of information that you can use to better plan for the upcoming months. Now is the great opportunity for you to ask some questions to our climate experts. They are sitting right here. Please start sending them in, and we'll get to as many as we can. These two are experts, and they're ready to take any question that you have about the climate. So we've got Grant, who's asked, what is the impact of climate change and the predictable patterns around the progress of such is having on the frequency and intensity of the current climate drivers?
It's a great question, and I mean, part of the benefit of having a climate model that does our outlooks for us is that it automatically builds in the warmer climate in general. But there are things that the researchers have found about our climate drivers. So, for instance, there is some signs of an increase in positive Indian Ocean dipole events and potentially stronger positive IOD events. And in terms of El Nino or La Nina, there's signs that we're more likely to see a more intense rainfall effect. It's a bit harder to see this result on Australia. They're more tending to look at the tropical regions. So it's a bit harder to see what our direct influence on Australia will be, though.
It's a tricky question to answer or observe because a lot of these events, they don't occur all that often, so we're not getting a large sort of sample size of events.
Okay, excellent. So moving on to a question from Christian. He said we're interested in the potential for above average wind in South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales.
I wish we had wind forecasts to look at that.
Yeah, apologies, we don't have a wind map to show you what the outlook might be there.
But there is somewhere on the website that we can find that out? Not really, okay. So Graham has asked, any information around the likely length of the northern wet season now that it's finally kicked in and when it might come to an end?
Well, officially, the wet season stops at the end of April.
Okay.
But if we go back, we'll have a little look at our outlook maps. And what we can see is that for parts of the north, we're actually expecting sort of March or March through to May to be a bit drier than usual. Saying that, the odds of that happening aren't super strong. It's not a huge departure from 50%. But the indication there is that rainfall for the coming months is going to be sort of average to below average in the north.
Okay. Roy has asked, what does a positive Indian Ocean dipole do to rainfall generally?
That's a great question, and generally a positive phase will bring drier conditions to much of southern and central Australia, and that's generally during the earlier months of winter and spring, and then towards the end we start to see that it also can influence parts of the north and giving a bit of a sluggish start to their northern wet season. So generally it's drier conditions.
We've got a question from Michael. Now I feel like you're going to have to do a little bit of explanation for this one to go through, but why such a big difference between the NASA and the ECMWF on Nino 3.4? Now, that is a lot to take in. Can you please break that down for us?
Sure. It's a great question. Now, thanks for going back to the slide. The first thing to note is that the bars that you see here are the model average. So the NASA model, for example, so that's the US, they have a plume, so they have several different scenarios, and so the bottom bar plot we see here is just the average of those several scenarios. I know the Bureau number, we have 100 different scenarios for our output, can't remember for NASA. So some of the models are overlap quite a bit in their different scenarios. And so it's just that some are slightly warmer and slightly cooler, but they are in the neutral range more broadly. And the other thing to note is that we're approaching what's called the autumn predictability barrier. And so at this time of year, it becomes a lot trickier to forecast El Nino because naturally this is when events start to decay. And so it gets a lot harder to see further beyond the autumn months. So it could just be that, you know, they're both plausible situations.
Yeah, they're sort of a different forecast for what the SST temperature will be, but they're both still ENSO-neutral forecasts. They're both still sitting within that middle sort of white band. So it's not as though one is saying there's going to be an El Nino and the other is saying there's going to be a La Nina. They're both saying that the most likely outcome is for a neutral ENSO.
Okay.
And worth noting that you have picked the two most furthest apart ones.
Well, I saw your faces just light up, Michael. They love talking about this kind of stuff. Please keep the questions coming. We still have some more time to take, about 5 minutes or so. Eileen has asked, just a cyclone outlook. Are we going to see anything for Queensland?
So our outlook for the tropical cyclone season as a whole was generally for below average numbers. However, it's worth noting this is the busiest time of the year for tropical cyclones. So it might seem like we've picked up in activity a bit.
And the season's not over.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there is a chance for more.
And I can't remember, have we had 5 or 6?
Exactly, that's right. I think we're up to 5 now, yeah. And typically we'd have sort of 9 to 11.
Okay.
Season's not over.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So Christian, he wants to know if there's going to be potential for extreme cold. See some snow events happening recently. Is there any other chances of that happening?
Mm-hmm. Well, autumn is one of those shoulder seasons, so we're moving from the warmest part of the year into the colder part of the year. So we're expecting temperatures on average will begin to drop. So we're moving towards the time of the year when we could potentially see extreme cold.
Okay. It is almost time to move on. So this is last questions, guys. So if you do have one, please send it in now. Peter, he sent a curly one. What is required in the basin storage or catchment to get significant runoff? And will the current front do this?
Well, the amount of runoff will often depend on the soil type and also the land use, what's growing above the soil, and also the preceding conditions, so how much moisture is already in the soil.
Okay, excellent. I honestly thought that was going to be a bit harder because for me, it is really interesting when you start talking to the hydrologists and they start saying, well, it all depends on this and that and everything else. We're getting to our last questions, as I said, so this is your last chance if you have anything else that you would like to let us know. I thought this one was nice. Agonista, and I really hope I've said that right, I don't think I have. She said, do you have any resources, links, or other for high school lessons?
Yeah, we do have some educational support material on the website. So perhaps it's best if we get her details, and we'll try and send her a link directly, perhaps.
Okay. Please send it in, and we'll do what we can for you. So what's the Jim has asked links for getting chance of 25mm rain in next week or next month.
Yep, we can provide a link to that. That's on our Climate Outlook's website. Just underneath the rainfall heading, there's a menu you can select. I'll just see if the link is actually on that slide.
Yeah. And if not, we do have an email that you can direct a lot of those trickier questions to us when we do the summary in about 2 minutes' time. So we will get to that in a second, Jim. So please, stay on, and we'll give you all the information that you need. So I think we might have our last question now. This comes from Greg. He wants to know the factors affecting coastal impacts of cyclones and a little bit of an explanation on these.
Mm-hmm. So there's a number of effects cyclones can bring to the coast, but one of those it will be inundation, will be sort of storm surge, and the amount of storm surge that you receive will have to do with the strength of the cyclone, but also the timing of the cyclone when it arrives and whether or not it coincides with sort of high tide or low tide.
Okay.
So those are ways that you can have different sort of interactions affecting the outcome of the impacts on the coast.
All right. Well, thank you everybody who's submitted a question. If we didn't get around to yours, you can email us. The link is now in chat from our super producer Claire. That is helpdesk.climate@bom.gov.au, and we will try and get to them. We have taken in a lot of information today, but in case you missed the start, Catherine, would you like to summarise what we spoke about today and where we can find more information?
Can do. So for autumn 2020, we're looking at above average temperatures likely to continue for most areas. Although we can see that for daytime temperatures, it looks like it's less likely to be warmer. Some areas in the south are likely to be wetter, and scattered parts of the north are likely to be drier. And as we discussed, our major climate influences are neutral. So ENSO, El Nino, La Nina, the Indian Ocean Dipole. And so this means we're more likely to see localised influences affecting Australia this autumn. And in terms of heat waves, there is the possibility of some late season heat waves. And as we mentioned, the bushfire season is still ongoing. Autumn is still a normal time of year to see bushfire activity for parts of the south. But do keep an eye out for an updated bushfire outlook. And in terms of flooding, there's a decreased chance of widespread flooding, but localised flooding is still possible. And in terms of more information, if you didn't get any of the links that Claire had provided to you in the chat box, we do also have this page here with more information for our outlooks and for observations. And actually, the other thing I should mention is we have an updated drought statement out today.
Excellent. Well, thank you for all that. Those links, I know they flashed up pretty quickly. You will get an email for anybody who attended, and the links will be in the PDF that's provided with that, so you'll be able to go through it. Our next BOM webinar will be on the 7th of April and is focused on predicting ocean temperatures. We're really excited about that one, so please click the registration link that is now in chat so you can join us.
Hey, Jordan,
yeah.
Does that include things like the Great Barrier Reef?
We're going to talk about a lot of stuff during it. We're still putting together everything for it, but it's going to be really exciting. I've had a look at some of it. Obviously, I'm not presenting it, and I've seen some interesting information in there. You can also jump onto bom.gov.au/webinars and sign up for our winter webinar as well, which will be coming up. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. For the questions we didn't get to, please email helpdesk.climate@bom.gov.au. A big thanks to you to Catherine and Jonathan for your time in developing the content and sharing your knowledge with us. And a big thank you to you for tuning in and joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we do hope you'll join us again next time. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please use hashtag BOMWebinars in your LinkedIn posts. Now, as mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded, and we will have the video ready for your on-demand viewing pleasure in the next couple of days, so watch this space. Finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It is our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experience with us. So once this webinar closes, sure, survey is going to pop up on your screen, and we'd be grateful if you could complete that anonymously for us. Thank you so much for your time again, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordan.
And then we really look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.